Hi, and welcome to the Awakening series, where we bring brilliant minds together. My name is Kimberly Archuleta. Today we have an amazing guest. Her name is Nashalla Nyinda. She is a Menpa, which is a Tibetan doctor, and we're very excited to have her on the show. Welcome to the Awakening series, Nashalla. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm so honored to have you on our show. If you wouldn't mind giving us some insight about your journey on how you got to where you are today.
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try and make it really short.
Yeah.
So essentially, I became really interested in herbs and natural healing when I was quite young. Mm-hmm. So I started receiving 5-element acupuncture when I was 15.
That's pretty young.
Yeah, yeah. And then kind of interested in herbs and those kinds of things. And then I didn't really want to go to college right away because I didn't think it was worth spending a bunch of money if I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Makes sense.
So I moved to Boston for a time, and I was a florist, and then I became kind of a worker with Whole Foods, and I worked in the natural healing market, and so I started diving into herbs more in depth. And then I came back with the intention of becoming a 5-element acupuncturist. So I went to Naropa University, and I had planned to take yoga classes and get a degree in yoga and then go on. But then I took this Tibetan Medicine course from a Western doctor who had been studying for about 25 years at the time. And I thought, well, okay, this is kind of weird and interesting, but fine. And then I took the second semester of it. A Rinpoche physician. So do you know what a Rinpoche is? So it's a reincarnated Lama who has memory of their previous lives. So he was the 5th incarnation of the same physician.
Wow.
So he was super doctor. And he spoke no English, and he didn't ask me one question. We all had to bring in our urine. So Tibetan medicine has a very special urine diagnosis that nobody else has. So we all had to bring in our urine, and he basically looked at my urine and looked at me, and then looked at my urine and looked at me, and he proceeded to tell me with complete accuracy how I was sleeping and what I was eating and all of these things. And I was like, I want to know how to do that.
Right.
So that sort of inspired me, and it took me 10 years and lots of trips to Asia, and then I eventually gave up and moved to India, where I studied for 2 years. And then I came home when I was expecting my first child. And then finished up by that time, a school had finally opened up in the West, so there wasn't anything when I began to study. So there was 2 books in English only. So I was kind of out there with the machete, trying to figure out how to get this done. So that's why it took me so long.
Yeah.
So it was a 10-year process.
That's amazing. What part in India?
So I lived in Darjeeling.
Okay.
Which is in West Bengal. It's in the upper east side of India.
Beautiful.
Tea country.
Tea country, yum. Yes. Wonderful. Yeah. So did you, I'm sure you probably met lifelong friends out there, teachers, things like that. Are you still in contact with anybody from there?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually headed out there next month.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's going to be amazing.
So,
Wonderful. And you being a practitioner and a physician, having the remedies behind you and all this experience, I'm sure you feel pretty comfortable flying to Asia with the virus, the coronavirus going on right now. Or what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not too worried. I think there are people that need to be concerned. So I think the people that really you need to take caution are those that have respiratory distress issues, or a history, a medical history of that. People with asthma, COPD, people with chronic respiratory illness, then they need to be careful.
Absolutely.
So I'm not in that category. So I will be taking lots of antivirals like Elderberry, and I make my own, so I'll be doing that. And then when I'm on the plane, I have a whole protocol that I do.
We want to hear it. We want to hear it.
So my protocol is that I have the, the really gross antibacterial wipes, and it's seatbelts, sides, table, everything.
Yeah.
And so I have that, and then I make a blend of essential oils that are more antibacterial, antiviral. And I mix them with lavender, which is really good for respiratory and is also antibacterial. And then I put it in a little dropper with some coconut oil as a base, because some of them can be quite volatile, thyme and those kinds of things. And then I just take a little Q-tip and I just around side of my nose, and I do that about every 4 hours.
Interesting.
Because when you're breathing the circulated air, it's got to go in through here, and so that's kind of like a first line defense.
Absolutely, that's amazing. And as far as the oils, essential oils, where would you get them from?
So I just order them online from various sources, like good sources, and then I just kind of make them. I'm a big kitchen cabinet medicine person. I feel like the majority of the medicines that you need, you should already have in your kitchen.
I love that.
So there's things like, thyme is really good, oregano is good, lavender, those are all 3 antibacterial, antiviral. So
huge. And as far as the elderberry, how do you go about making your own elderberry?
Okay. So you buy elderberry in bulk. I actually grow it in my yard, but what the birds don't give me, then you can also buy. And you want to be careful with elderberry if you're growing it, because the stems themselves have cyanide in them. So you want to be really careful, please, if you make this at home, to not have any leaves or stems. That's really important. So the berries by themselves do not have cyanide in them, but what you need to do is you need to cook them down really well. So say you have like 2 cups elderberry and like 3 cups water, and then I'll take star anise, because that has the active compound that they actually take and then turn into Tamiflu, which is the prescription antiviral that they'll give you.
And this is all organic. This is all your own. Wow.
So you just take some of that, like take a tablespoon of that. And then cinnamon is also extremely antibacterial and very useful for the immune system. It also stabilizes your insulin levels pretty well. So I'll do cinnamon, and then cloves is a natural bronchodilator. So it's really good for asthmatics, so I'll usually throw that in. And then I usually put in thyme as well. And then you boil it up on the stove, and you kind of turn it into this soupy kind of compound. And then I take an immersion blender, and I kind of blend it up so it's kind of thick. And then you take a very loose cheesecloth, and you squeeze it all, and then you get the syrup. And then you add honey to kind of preserve, and then you keep it in your refrigerator. And then I give my kids like a tablespoon every day prophylactically.
That's so smart. That's amazing. And it's all homemade, homegrown, just about. Wonderful. As far as your patients, if you don't mind taking a look at your patients, how many patients have you had since you started your practice?
I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, so I don't really know if I could give a number. Hundreds. I don't know. I have patients that come in and out where I'll see them like once every few years. I'll have patients that come in once a year. I have patients that sort of come in for like a short course of treatment, and then I won't see them again for like a really long time, and then it'll be like 4 years, and then they'll appear again. And then I have people that are working on chronic things. So I'll see them kind of initially kind of close together, and then it becomes a seasonal thing, and it'll take 2 or 3 years to kind of work through that.
Oh, yeah.
So it just kind of depends. So hundreds.
Yeah, that's quite a bit. Yeah. As far as the Boulder location, what made you decide to bring this practice to Boulder?
Well, I went to college here, and then I lived in the mountains. I'm from Colorado, so my parents are in Denver, grew up here, and it was just my community. It's where I got started. And then the Western MD that I originally studied with had his GP family practice. And if you're in alternative medicine, you really need to have GPs on your side that you can send people to for like Western medical tests and blood work and things like that. You need to have people that you trust that are in the license field that you can send when you know you have reached your capacity and you need to have others.
Very cool. Very cool. As far as your practice, what type of what would be your favorite type of practice that you do with people that come in with some type of ailment? Is it if you can give us an idea of how that works when they come in and diagnosis and things like that?
I tend to get mostly people who have been to everything else. I get a lot of people who have just heard of me, and so they come in. It's like that's pretty much, I'm a word of mouth person, And so like I don't advertise at all. It's just all word of mouth. And so I get a lot of people who have like tried the naturopath, tried the functional medicine, tried the Chinese medicine, tried the like everything. I get a lot of people with really severe gastric distress, like really chronic indigestion is kind of my specialty. I would say if you have a specialty, it's like that and pregnant women. So it's kind of like I run the gamut. But I would say that's a majority of my practice of people that like they just don't know what to eat, you know, because it's an individualized system of medicine. So it's not like everybody does this diet and they get better. So a lot of people are trying alternative medicine and they're trying to really eat well and they've done everything and they're just kind of like, I'm not better. What do I need to do? So that's probably the majority of the people that I see. And then I see people like for allergies and I have quite a bit of autoimmune people who are trying to just manage their disease and or slow it down.
Manage is a good word. I think that's a very good word for that because it is just figuring out like as day in and day out what you're dealing with and how you manage through the day with different types of food and allergies and things like that. Very interesting. So I saw your beautiful, wonderful medicines, if you will, in your next door. Can you give us some insight on the medicines that you have back there? Because there's so many. It's beautiful.
So Tibetan medicine is really kind of based off of the theory of the 5 elements. So the 5 elements are sort of developed into 6 tastes. So Tibetan medicine has 6 tastes, like, you know, Western medicine says 4, Chinese medicine expands that, says 5, Ayurveda says 6, Tibetan medicine says 6. So those 6 tastes interact with your organs that are on the inside of your body. And so you actually have an interaction of like fire meets fire or fire meets water. And so like you can imagine the difference between fire meeting fire and fire meeting water and how that interacts. So it's said within the medical tantras that the taste which is on your tongue is the true taste. But then you know how it's going to interact with the organs. So like, for example, we have 2 types of indigestion. We have cold indigestion and we have hot indigestion. So the cold indigestion are the people that get the bloating and the belching and the burping and the like heavy discomfort or feeling like they need to sleep after they eat a meal, like that kind of heavy cognitive, like, ugh, I need a cup of coffee sort of feeling after they eat food, versus the hot indigestion, which is we see the commercials for like the, you know, you want to eat your chili dog, you can have your Protonic, and you can do that. So they get the acid reflux. So like for the hot indigestion, for example, mint is very cooling. Yeah, so it's going to kind of cool down the system, versus people who are drinking mint thinking that it's really good for them because it's a digestive tea in the herbal world, but they don't realize that it's very cold. And so then they're just kind of adding cold to the cold. So a lot of what I'm doing with formulas or dietary advice, both, is to really explain to the person, like, this is actually who you are. And so we're going to try and balance that. So if you have too much air, we're going to give you a little bit of earth. If you have too much fire, then we're going to put in some water. But it's all about balancing it. So that's done through the 5 elements and the 6 tastes. And then we have what's called 3 post-digestive tastes, meaning that it's gone through that initial phase of digestion, and then in the duodenum it's basically separated and sorted out. And they have actually now found gastroreceptors in the small intestine that actually match with what, you know, thousands of years of Tibetan medicine has said. So,
wow, that's phenomenal. Cool. That is really cool. And I noticed with each item that you have there, it looks like they're round little circular type of medicines, and you just digest them. You just chew them and you eat them, or sometimes possibly swallow them. Was that?
Yeah, because the taste is really the cure.
That's the taste.
I really want them to be opened, is kind of how I put it. Typically they're taken with warm water, and then you don't have to chew them to infinity, but like, because some of them are not that yummy. But we want them to be open so that when they get to the stomach, that initial taste that's inside there. So like, you can have a formula that can be as simple as having 3 ingredients up to 70.
Wow.
And so it's a very exact science for how you're combining herbs according to the elements and how you're applying that. And so a basic pharmacy is going to have about 180 formulas or so. And then there's always like little kind of things that you put on top. And then I'm, like I said, a very big like do it yourself kind of person. So I really want to put my patients in charge of their own healthcare. And so I'm really focused on, like, I'll write down recipes, or I'll say, like, okay, do you have this, you need to cook more with this spice, or you need to, you know, make a tea of the following things, and I'll send them to the herb store, and then they can make that themselves. So it just kind of varies.
We need a million of you. We truly need a million of you, and on every street corner, like giving this advice, and not at 7-Eleven, but you. That's amazing. I love this idea, the thought process, because not many people know about what you do or how you do it, or the Tibetan philosophy, and the fact that you're actually basically proactively saying, here you go, you could self-heal. No wonder why you don't see your patients, you know, every week or every 2 weeks, because they're doing it themselves as well.
Well, it's also like based off of this concept of your inner cosmology, right? So you are you, and like you can have a million years training in medicine, but I don't live in your body. You live in your body. So I have to pay attention to how you are interacting with where you live, what's your environment, what are your stressors, what are you eating, you know, how much are you sleeping, like all of those factors come together. And I actually feel really bad for Western doctors, because they get like 15 minutes, or if they're really clever at coding, maybe 25. And then that's not enough time to cover the whole spectrum of a person's being and what they really need to put them in charge of their own selves, because we're so used to just going and getting medicine. So medicine is like only one leg of the stool. We have 4 methods of treatment in Tibetan medicine. So it's diet, behavior, medicine, and then accessory therapy. So diet and behavior, if I'm doing my job correctly, it's like saying, this is your suitcase, this is who you are. So in winter, be careful of this. In summer, be careful of this. Oh, spring and fall, this might shift a little bit. And so somebody might need a certain like dietary prescription to carry them through the winter. And then it has to shift, because their inner cosmology shifts and the outer cosmology shifts. So then you have to pay attention to that. And then what you're doing is you're training the patient to kind of have that awareness of being in harmony with nature. And it's a total game changer.
That is a game changer. I'm just thinking about the seasons, because we just put on a jacket. We don't change our diet if we're, you know, in the freezing cold, or if we go to Florida for 2 weeks and it's extremely hot. But it's a thought process that you're teaching as well, which is brilliant. I mean, this is brilliant. So as far as your teachers, your past teachers, who has been your favorite, and why?
In medicine or in Buddhism?
Both.
So my root guru is Trungpa Rinpoche, and he basically is the reason that I am a doctor today. Mostly because he really ordered me to move to India. So he's like my steady guide and companion, and so he's sort of like my Buddhist master. And then in terms of medical teachers, I've had many. I mean, my original teacher, Dr. Philip Weber, is in his 70s now, and he was an incredibly amazing GP who really took the time to like listen to his patients and treat them as individuals. And he still kind of quasi teaches at the medical school, so he's kind of trying to teach young doctors to kind of think of people as whole people. And so, you know, I definitely have great appreciation for him, because he put me on the path. And then I actually just lost my mentor of like 23 years, who was a Taoist acupuncturist, and her name was Sandra Lilly. So she just recently passed, and so she was a huge influence in my life. And I have had a wide number of medical teachers over time. And, Chakpori Tibetan Medical School is kind of where my roots are. So that's in the Darjeeling Hills. And, all of that lineage is kind of with me all the time. And then I have some teachers in New York that I sometimes still regularly kind of engage with and talk with them if I run into a tough case or something, or my husband and I, because he's a senior physician to me, we'll discuss some things. So so there's a lot of I have a lot of teachers.
Do you have any mentees?
I do. I have my intern.
Yes.
So that I've worked with, and then I have other people that are interested in studying. I'm very careful about taking on internships because I want it to be the full throttle. I'm not really interested in people learning surface level and not having the depth, because it's such a depth of practice. So to internship with me is quite an undertaking. It's several years.
Wow.
Being with me.
Yeah.
So,
I appreciate that. Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So do you feel that your family benefits from you and your husband being in this line of work? I mean, I could only imagine how extensive this goes with possibly doing certain things in the morning or changing things up in the afternoon or seasonal. How does that work in your household?
I think my kids have just always taken herbs and things. So none of my children have ever had antibiotics, which is, my oldest is almost 13, which is kind of unheard of, really. So I've treated everything from ear infections to conjunctivitis to whatever with herbs. So I think that's a beneficial thing for them, especially for their microbiome. And I think that my middle daughter likes to make medicine with me. So she actually will help me make the elderberry. And they're just kind of used to it. And I have one particular medicine that's good for warming the stomach, and it actually tastes good, and it's mostly made of pomegranate. So whenever they come into the clinic, they'll be like, my tummy hurts. And it's not their tummy hurts, they just want to eat it.
It's yummy. It's like candy, probably.
For them, it's like candy.
That's cute.
I also think there's an awareness for my children of their body that is not necessarily common. I don't really know what that experience is like for them, other than, I think that they definitely know things more in depth than other kids might. But I think time will tell as they become full people, what that really does for them. We garden a lot. We do a lot of gardening and growing our own food, and
that's wonderful.
Greenhouse, that kind of
Wow, that's amazing. As far as your practice, what do you want to do next? You're here in Boulder, you're serving the community. What do you want to do next with your practice and or for yourself personally with what your experience has been thus far?
My big goal is to really help Tibetan medicine take a really firm rooting in the West so that people understand what it is and what it is not. So I've kind of been instructed to teach more. And so I do a lot of teaching. So I teach at Naropa University. So I teach Western nutrition and I teach Western anatomy, but I throw in some Asian medicine as well. And I teach workshops. I teach all over the world. I publish articles. I'm working on several books at the moment.
Wonderful.
So that's a big part of it, of really helping people to understand what Tibetan medicine is and how it can benefit them, but also to really protect it from being watered down. I think there's a danger in the West where you take something that is so culturally rich and you bring it out of context into a new world. People see the benefit of it, and so they kind of want to jump on the bandwagon, but it's a typical 5-year study. It's just like going to medical school. So there's a 5-year study, 1-year internship. So it's not a small task to actually train properly. And so I really am trying to look at how to make that happen more in the West and try and work with other people that are working on that issue.
How many people do you think in the U.S. Are like you? How many other practitioners and physicians?
I can really say I can count on two hands.
Wow.
The people who are actively practicing with full clinics.
Wow.
And then of those that are actually Western embodied people, slims down to about one hand of the people that I would feel comfortable worldwide sending my patients to. That is changing slowly over time, and so that's really exciting to watch happen. But not very many. Yeah, not very many. It's very much in its infancy. So Tibetan medicine today in 2020 is essentially where Chinese medicine was in the 1970s in America. So it's very new, and it's kind of bursting onto the scene, and so some caution needs to happen with that in terms of making sure that there becomes proper regulation, and there becomes, a way to sort of ensure proper training, and
absolutely.
Yeah, all of that's really vital.
Absolutely. As far as you saying what it is and what it isn't, can you tell us what it's not?
It is not Ayurveda. It is not Chinese medicine. Those are two separate systems. So the way that I will describe Tibetan medicine most commonly is, if you imagine the Silk Road, if you go back to the Silk Road and you think about how Greece kind of began the three humors of the medicine, and then that kind of moved into the Middle East, and you have the influence of the Unani medicine throughout all of the Middle East, Uzbekistan, modern day Pakistan, Kazakhstan, that whole area. And then that would then make its information way down into Ayurveda and kind of became the three humors. And then from there you also see that those people traveled up and into Tibet and then along the Silk Road. And then from the east, you have the influence of the five elements and the Taoist masters and Confucianism. And then already happening within Tibet was this animistic, shamanistic sort of system. And Buddhism kind of came into Tibet around the 7th century. And then I would say it's basically taking all of those influences, overlaying over the Buddhist kind of concept of psychology, mingling with this shamanistic, animistic system that had influence through the Silk Road, putting it in a blender, and that would essentially be Tibetan medicine.
Wow.
So it's really comprehensive, it's very unique, and it's indigenous to the people of central Tibet.
Yeah.
So
that was a fantastic thought process behind it. I mean, the history, the lineage. What year do you think it kind of evolved?
You can really trace it back to about the 2nd and 3rd century, where two physicians kind of came from what's modern day Pakistan. They went in, and then the king at the time, of course, this is what you do when you're a king, is you offer your daughter to the guy. So, that began the first sort of lineage, and then around the 8th century is kind of when it really cohesed, and there was a big meeting that happened in Samye Monastery. It's kind of like the first world medical conference.
How exciting. Wow.
And it was months of debates, and of course, the Tibetan won. And so from there, the book that is known as the Four Tantras of Tibetan medicine, so it is a religious and medical book, both kind of together. So you have to receive certain initiations in order to study it, typically. And so that book was written, and it's the same book from the 8th century to today that I studied, that was studied back then. And of course, I could fill up this whole room with books on commentaries on those. And then there were specific masters that came throughout time that kind of wrote their own sort of specialty books that we all read as a commentary, but it's that one book.
That one book.
It's the Four Tantras.
I love that it's that one book, but I also love that everybody else had their own spin on it, depending on where they lived and where they were traveling to, and just giving more insight on elaborating and evolving this beautiful practice.
Yeah, there were typically two lineages primarily within Tibet. So Jangpa and Zerpa, and that's because eastern Tibet was kind of wet and moist and mountainous, and central Tibet was more dry, so you'd find different herbs there. And then you'd have herbs that, like I said, came along the Silk Road, and so you'd have things come from the south, and you'd have things come from the east. So things that Ayurveda uses, we might use, but we might use a different part. Like they might use the root, we might use the leaf. And then like something that China uses the flower, you know, we might use the stem. So it just kind of, there's like this evolving sort of system, and so commentaries are sort of based
Helpful.
upon that.
Yeah, that now makes more sense. Thank you for that. That's good insight. What do you think you'd like your audience or even future patients to know about you and your practice and how you work with them as a new patient?
So typically when I see a new patient, it's like an hour and a half long.
Okay.
And then I go over a complete life history, and I will kind of basically inform you where your elements are, like what balance or imbalance are they appearing. And so then from there, I basically try and teach you what the antidote is. So this is the diet you need to eat. These are, you know, the behaviors that you need to engage in to sort of correct that. So, you know, the fact that this is a Buddhist system means that it's homeostasis is not static. And we know this in medicine. We know homeostasis is not static. We know that a childhood illness is very different from someone who's very old. And then we know like middle age. So like going back to this virus, it's really interesting because children seem to not be affected because there is different strains of coronaviruses that are already available within the world. So a lot of data that's coming out is typically when you worry about like this kind of viral flu type thing, when some people are saying, oh, well, the flu is worse. Well, the flu is worse because the flu can kill young children and old children. And this is taking down far less young children. So then they know that there's already a strain of that within the population. So then it's like knowing where you are in stages of your life. And so I'm kind of like informing them like, oh, did you have this at this time in your life? Now it's like this. Okay, this is why. So it's a lot of
mapping, like
I'm sorry?
Would it be mapping?
Not mapping. It's more like informing you like how your health has changed over time, or layers. There might be, it's more like kind of peeling back the onion, like, oh, this, like if it's a chronic disease, we have to kind of get down to it. If it's more acute, it's more at the surface. So it just kind of depends. So like if somebody calls me, so there's been this wild respiratory virus that's been going around this year that like lingers with the cough that just will not go away. So for example, someone will come in and we'll treat that as an acute situation versus somebody who has like chronic asthma. Like, and if they get that illness, they're going to react very differently. So we have to like know that. Or for example, somebody in liver disease, if they have a particular type of nature, it's going to be more dangerous for them versus somebody else. So like knowing the type of person you are with your own elements and then how that matches with your disease or doesn't match. And so trying to find what homeostasis is for you individually is kind of the goal.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And now I see why you do feel bad for physicians when they have the 15 minutes with somebody and they quickly read the history. It's incomplete. It's incomplete history because it might have been something here or there, but you go into depth. I mean, an hour plus meeting with your patients is so helpful to peeling back the onion or those layers and figuring out what's compounded or what is now surface. And I love that. That time you give to your patients is priceless almost, because you can really figure out how to help them and how they can help themselves.
Yeah. No, I mean, it really is about people being an active process in their own healing. That's like vital. If you don't have that, if you're not like self-invested, then, you know, nobody can help you really. And so like I said, I see a lot of people who have seen everyone and they've chased everything and they eat really well and they exercise and they get, you know, 7+ hours of sleep and they meditate and they do this and they're still not better. And it's like, okay, so let's do some little tweaking and let's see what happens. And so, you know, the follow-up appointments are like an hour, you know, 40 minutes to an hour depending. So I have people who have been with me for like 10, 15 years that I can do a recheck with them in 20 minutes because they know themselves so well. They can auto-correct. I mean, that's the point. It's the job of the physician to not be needed.
I love that. It's the job of the physician to not be needed. That's beautiful. Wonderful. So just a few last questions, if you don't mind. What would be on your vision board for 2020? Say a photo or something that you have a goal for this year. Do you have
I
any?
need to get my book done.
The book, okay.
Yeah, it's the book. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. One of the 4 that's already in a complete draft needs to be get out in the world.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the big one.
What's the topic?
I think the first one that needs to be published is really the kitchen spice.
Oh, kitchen spice.
Tibetan
Okay.
medicine in your kitchen cabinet.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And where can we find you online?
So online, I'm a terrible self-promoter. I said I'm like word of mouth. So we have a website for the clinic, which is holistic-health.org. And then we have a newsletter that you can sign up for, I think.
Nice.
It's on the contact of that page.
Awesome.
And then you can find me on Facebook, either under my name, Nashalla Nyinda, or you can find our clinic, Tibetan Medicine and Holistic Healing. Those are the primary sources at the moment. It's like I don't want to do more social world, like the world's too busy as it is. So like my phone goes in the drawer. I don't text. Like I'm like kind of archaic. I always say like if I wanted to be like a modern person, I wouldn't have studied in ancient medicine. So I'm like kind of hiding out in the other centuries. So I don't really do like other Instagram-y, whatever those things are called. So
Perfect.
But mostly I'm just on Facebook. And I have some helper bees that help me with that stuff. So
good. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything you'd like to tell the audience about your past, your future, what you do currently, to give us more insight on, kind of jumping on the bandwagon and spreading the word about this amazing practice?
I think if I was to tell anybody anything, I think it's trust yourself. I think it's trust yourself that you know who you are, and that if you're not getting the right answers from the doctors you're seeing, then keep looking, because you know yourself, you live in your body, and nobody else does. And I think if you find somebody that's really trained in understanding the natural phenomena of the world through food, through medicine, it doesn't have to be Tibetan medicine necessarily, but if you keep looking for someone who wants to be a partner, like don't go and look for someone to just do it for you. You need a partnership. So that would be my advice.
That's beautiful.
Really for anybody.
That's wonderful. Nashalla, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. You're a
You're
blessing
most
to all.
welcome.
I'm so excited. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.